Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Well, thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design today. We've got a really interesting speaker with us, Becky Turner, who I'm going to talk about in a minute. But first of all, I have to say thanks to everybody who's actually gone and bought a printed and an ebook copy of our Journal of Biophilic Design. You can get it on Amazon and also directly from ourselves on the journalofbiophilicdesign.com. And I also have to let you know, as my business coach wouldn't speak to me again if I didn't tell you, if you like our podcast series, obviously please subscribe to the channel, but you can also buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com, and I'll put a link on the spiel. So that's the ask out of the way, the bit that I'm rubbish out and I feel really uncomfortable asking. So if you would like to buy me a coffee, that would be wonderful. And thank you in advance on both accounts anyway. So anyway, back to the podcast. We're really thrilled to be joined by, as I say, Becky Turner. She's a workplace consultant at Claremont Group Interiors. She's going to be speaking at the workplace event. And if you don't know, that's taking place at the NEC in Birmingham in the UK on the 25th and 27th of April, 2023. We're going to be there too. Becky is going to be speaking about the workplace oooh. She's going to tell us about that in a minute. But if you want to book a free place to the event, I'm going to put a link as well on the spiel that goes with the podcast. So first of all, Becky, hi, how are you? All right?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excellent, great. Well, can you tell us about yourself and what got you into workplace psychology?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I've always been really interested in psychology. It's something that throughout school, throughout A levels, and then into my undergraduate psychology, it's just been something that I've been fascinated by. And then I went traveling, sort of did that gap year thing. And I remember being in Australia and speaking to somebody. I met somebody who was talking about occupational psychology, and I thought, oh no, that sounds awful. That sounds really dull. I don't want to do that. And she'd sort of said, if you wanted to come out to Sydney afterwards, I can get you a job and this and that. And I thought, you know what, it sounds just boring. When you're going into doing an undergrad, you think, oh, I'll get into the forensic stuff, profiling killers, and I'll get into the clinical stuff, all of that sort of exciting, what people get really invigorated by in psychology. But yeah, go full scale. I got into sort of education sector after uni, decided that wasn't quite for me. And then I found a job at Claremont, and it was all in sort of a mix between the business development and the marketing team. And as I was getting invested in the organization, I sort of thought, oh, there's a little bit of a gap here. I think we're designing spaces for people, but there's not a psychology element to it. So I sort of put my thoughts on paper a little bit, took that to to my manager at the time, and said, actually, I think there's a gap. I'd like to fill it. I'd like to be the person to do it. Let me out for day release, essentially, 1 day a week. I'll go and complete my master's in organizational psychology. And sort of 5-6 years on, here we are.
Fantastic.
So that it was, quite an interesting story. I didn't think I'd end up here, to be completely honest, but it's where we spend 5 days a week at work. So, and it impacts our psyche massively. So yeah,
it's really true. And that's really, it's interesting to hear you say it impacts our psychology massively. It does. And listeners, you're going to hear more about how it impacts us and what we can do to really make it good for us. As I normally start kind of trying to set the scene and saying what's wrong with the workplace, but I don't want to do that today. I know we're going to come to that, obviously, but I want to know a little bit more about what you're working on and obviously what you're going to be speaking at the workplace event. The workplace, double O, so I've written it down. I'm going to let you describe that to the listeners. And obviously, I know nature connection as well is important to you. I mean, how can you explain how we should feel when we enter an office? How should that workplace experience be for us?
So the workplace or it could be, it's really born about this sort of walking into a space or a natural area, wherever it is, and you get that sense of awe and you kind of go like, oh, whereas if you're seeing fireworks, something like, oh, interesting. And And we wanted to sort of replicate that within the workplace, because since the kind of pandemic and this sort of new normal, next normal, whatever you want to call it, way of working, we thought, okay, talking about all these desk ratios and occupancy numbers, that's not what's getting people back to the office. They're not going to think, oh, a 6 to 10 desk ratio, that's perfect. I'm going to make that commute just for that reason. You're going to go back to the office for a feeling, for a sense of connection. What's going to really make you take the cost of the commute, whether that's financial or time, what's going to drive you into the office? So we wanted to do a bit of research on this. We had our own thoughts, but we thought, okay, let's go out and see what everyone else is thinking. So we commissioned a piece of research, went to just over 1,000 office-based workers, and it sort of let us know what types of things beyond, like, say, desks and functional areas are going to invite you back to the office, which really is one of the things that we're hearing so many of our clients talking about. We can't get anyone in, low occupancy at like 30% or something like that. So we found essentially 6 key feelings that people not just want the office to give them, but really are starting to expect from the office. I'll go into a bit more detail about what those are sort of at the event and as we release our white paper or report based on this. But one of them really is that sense of being connected, feeling connected. And for me, this links really nicely to biophilia in Fromm's kind of wider consideration of biophilia, in that love of life. So it's not just nature to me, it's that sense of connection with other people and community. It's the sense of freedom, which comes possibly with hybrid working, depending on the kind of model your organization's implementing. But yeah, connection to your brand, connection to your people, to your organization, to your sense of purpose. All of those things is so important, and you can really, it's difficult to design into these, it's complex. All of these 6 feelings, how do you design to incite a feeling? But it comes through all different elements. So color theory, it comes from that employee journey, the employee experience, the brand experience, how you're driving people into one space for those connections, spontaneous connections that you don't get through that more transactional way of working when it's just virtual. You call somebody for a reason, you don't just bump into them. So it's all about that journey really, and what you put within the journey and the variety of spaces, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you say, it's about people, and I always say that about biophilia. People think, oh, it's plants, and it's that connection to like wood or trees or whatever, and it's sort of on patterns of nature. But it's bio, it's life, it's all living things. It's anything that's living, and as you say, it's us too, and animals. I'm also an advocate of bringing animals into the workplace, or animals into a care home or a work. I think just to be connected to things that are alive, it just fills you with joy. It fills you with that ooh feeling. It really does.
There's something.
Go on.
I was going to say there's something to be said about that feeling when somebody does bring in a dog to the office. And I think it's got to be done about the right way, because there are some people that might be afraid of dogs, or their culture shows that actually dogs shouldn't be domestic animals, whatever it is. But if it's done in the right way, the feeling that people get, we've got one of my colleagues, she brings in her Frenchie sometimes, and there's people rolling around the floor with the dog. And, although it takes you out of your work for maybe 5 minutes, the energy that it invigorates back into you, it's an investment of time, isn't it? And it just makes people feel so much better and connected to that one thing at that time.
Yeah, and it's fun, isn't it? It lifts you, because it's funny. It gives you joy, doesn't it? It gives you that happiness. It gives you that sense of laughter as well when you see it kind of like, giggling around and rolling on the floor or whatever. Obviously, biophilic design. Obviously, we talk about biophilia and life. But for me, obviously, biophilic design holds so many keys to sort of like bringing that awe and that sort of sense of like, ooh, yeah, I must get back into the office. I did like that about, the ratio thing, really not doing it, not cutting it. But obviously from everything from like prospect and refuge to sort of improving acoustics and everything. What for you is sort of positive about biophilic design? You've touched on it already, but what is it about biophilic design that would allow designers to to create these better workplace environments for people to come to?
It's kind of an interesting one, because the benefits are so widely documented and so widely researched. You almost think if you put that research in front of somebody, you'd be silly not to take it up. The reduction in cortisol, so there's the stress hormone to make you feel better, to make you feel less stressed, increased mood, creativity, productivity, that sense of connection and with people as well, again. And all of that will create a sort of a healthier, happier and more productive workforce. But then why aren't people doing it? It's just interesting to me. And I think that unconsciousness shows for us in some workshops that we carry out. So if we're engaging with an organisation that are going to go through a workplace change, sort of a refurbishment or a relocation, something like that, a redesign, we'll do some workshops with some colleagues, and part of the activity is almost a budgeting exercise where we'll give people, I think it's about 16 different elements of the workplace, and get them to put £100 budget against that. So they can allocate it however they like. It doesn't have to be against everything. And unanimously, planting gets maybe £5, but predominantly at £0. No one wants to spend money on that when they could spend more on tech or lighting, all those other areas. So really it's sort of showers and plants that come at the bottom. But then it's interesting. But later on, we do sort of an exercise where people pick out certain images of the workplace that they'd like theirs to look like. And again, unanimously, they've always got plants in them. And not all the images do have plants in.
Yeah.
And it's that sense of natural light. It's the sense of space. It all relates back to biophilia, but it seems to me, therefore, there's sort of an unconscious connection, which is maybe why there's a difficulty there in taking all those statistics and then implementing them, because there is a cost associated, but actually the benefits are not always, benefits that you feel are not always tangible, particularly if you're coming from it from a facilities management or a finance perspective, if that makes sense. So it's difficult to do, but for me, of course, biophilic design, as I mentioned, and as you mentioned, it goes beyond just the plants. It's making the most of your natural light. It's incorporating natural imagery into the space, and it's creating or taking those principles from the workplace, like the natural environment, like you mentioned with the prospect refuge theory. We'll get into that a little bit later, but it's taking all of those elements and weaving them into design, really. And you could be fun and you could be creative with it. And that freedom of choice, for me, is a key principle of biophilic design. It's a freedom of choice. And with the current workplaces and the way that we're moving, I think that's becoming a lot more prevalent, which is great to see. It's not just that you get a desk and an office and a meeting room anymore. You do get a sense of choice and freedom to explore. So for our designers, they're able to naturally create those better environments by weaving this into the fundamental concept of design.
Yeah, I think as well, like you say, I think one of the things I love about biophilic design is that you can create this zoning. You can create these spaces, you can kind of create this terrain where we can walk about and explore and, almost have that, savanna, and then the sort of like, the sort of prospect with the refuge thing where you can put yourself in a cave almost, do you know what I mean? If you kind of, and you sort of create those, replicate those spaces, so that we can choose where we want to go and where we want to sit and where we want to focus. Obviously not every workplace has the sort of, maybe the space to do that, but then if people are working from home, then there is space. We kind of, I know Nigel Osland always talks about how we should, the workplace zoo, how we need to landscape the office, Bureau Landschaft, or the Landschaft Bureau, kind of put it around the right way in German, how we should create that landscaped office so that we can have those havens and those spaces for when we have a different sort of mindset. Actually, I would like to talk about choice. Obviously people have worked from home and they've kind of said, oh, I actually want to go and walk the dog now, or I want to just like go and work in the in the bedroom because it's quiet and I need some quiet space and all the kids are making a noise, or the same thing is like if you're in a workplace, they kind of, all my colleagues are making a noise, where am I going to go? I've got nowhere to go, I've got to get stuck to my desk. So there isn't that element of choice. I mean, how do you how do you think we can sort of help the workforce not lose that sense of autonomy and how do we bring that back as designers? Obviously Biophilic design is one of those things. So what's your sort of thought on that, on choice?
It's, for me, that the thought is how important it is.
Yeah.
Beyond choice, it's a sense of control, I think, which comes, it sits alongside having the choice, and therefore you've got a personal control, and an organization that empowers you to take that control as well. So they don't just say, this is it, but actually, if I don't see you at your desk, I'll be wondering what you're doing. So it's kind of a presenteeism mindset shift, as we're hearing a lot. And in a hybrid world, there's lots of forms of hybrid working, and some organizations have been quite fluid with it, which is absolutely a great way to go. It's offering that choice naturally. However, some are mandating days in the office, and that could be for many reasons, and it might work for that organization. It could be to change the habit of working from home, and actually driving people back in, and then you'll get to a point where they can make an informed choice after that based on sort of what they've got on that day, or tasks and activities, or personal commitments, whatever it might be. But for now, organizations that are mandating days back in, you're almost taking away a sense of choice and control that people had before. So it's up to them to then put into the office, design into the office choice, micro choices, I suppose. It's all about variety, really. So taking into consideration lots of different things. So your job role, your personality, your personal preferences, any sort of neurodiversity, mental or physical disability or challenges. All of those things are going to mean that people will use the office differently. So purely by giving variety, so you've got maybe some hyper minimal spaces, so people can go and just focus without getting distracted, because perhaps they've got ADHD and the smallest thing will distract you from what you're doing. It could be those quiet refuge spaces to take 5 if you're particularly stressed, or you've had a highly emotive call if you're in a contact center, for example. It could be a dynamic workspace that you can get up and you're whiteboarding and you're having a creative session. You might even want to take that outside if that's not pushing it too far. So yeah, all of those areas really are creating variety, which gives you a sense of choice to then think, okay, for me, I'm best doing this piece of work here because, and providing your colleagues with that opportunity to explore your space. If it's new, explore it and work out what works best for them. Don't mandate that this space is just for this activity. Let them go and have a little play, work out what works for them, and again, be creative and have some fun within the space.
Yeah, I think you also mentioned like your sort of micro choices. I thought that was an interesting phrase. There are different people I talk to, and different manufacturers are like offering, like micro control of lighting or heated desks, or there's so many things about leaving blow heaters under tables and all that sort of thing that we've spoken about before. But does that all fall into it? That sort of like actually the environment, not just like where you go and what that looks like, but actually, what's your sort of take on those kind of micro choices?
Yeah, really important. Again, you've been able to control that a lot at home. So you can really, people tend to have desk lamps that they can control the level of lighting or the shade of lighting that they've got, or the sound. And again, almost unanimously, top 5 reasons for people not coming back to the office that we found from our surveys since around, since the workplaces started to open up again. Noise has been a real challenge. And I think the level of noise hasn't changed necessarily since pre-COVID. So why is it such an issue now? And I think that comes from a perception. So people have been able to control that noise at home, whether it's music or silence or whatever it is. They've been able to control it to an extent. Whereas coming back to the workplace, you lose that sense of control over it in the most part. So providing quiet spaces that you can go to focus. But actually, you could go into those spaces and put on a little bit of music, whether that's to get some energy going, or if that's to calm you and get you focused. Or you might put on white noise or brown noise or pink noise to get you into that zone of focus. So yeah, those small elements that control the environment around you, lighting, noise, temperature, they're the key ones that we find. If you can, we're not saying that you want to especially if you've got an open plan workspace, you want everyone to be able to have to control the temperature, because we know what happens there. It's a nightmare. But having certain spaces that you could go to that you either know are a bit cooler, you know are a bit warmer, or you can just sit in that small pod and control it to whatever suits you. Yeah. Because we know, for example, males and females have different optimum body temperatures, or temperatures around them to work at their best. You've also then got, for example, menopause, and being able to control that. And you might want to really quickly change the temperature because of what your body's doing at the time. So everyone's going to be a little bit different. So offering a sense of control in some way is going to be beneficial to your people, and part of that human-centric design, really.
Yeah, fantastic. You mentioned about neurodiversity, and maybe we could talk about that now. Obviously, the workforce is more inclusive, thankfully, mostly. It's not perfect by any means. But what do we need to be considering? I mean, you've touched on it already, but I mean, what do we need to be considering, particularly in workplace environments, when we're considering like sort of a neurodiverse workforce, and what would the impact be on everybody, actually? What would if we're sort of designing for the extremes, as it were?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, designing for the extremes, because speaking with our neurodiversity partners, it's basically everything that you do to support the neurodivergent community in a workforce is going to be a benefit to everybody. Everyone can use it, but like you say, you're designing for the extremes and everywhere in between. So it's not just making one change that will suit the small percentage. It's going to help everyone. So neurodiversity really refers to that sort of individual differences in your brain functioning and behavioral traits. And it was around I think it was the late 90s, 98, I think, that Judy Singer kind of coined this term, and it was more from a positive social science perspective rather than a medical perspective. So we're taking it away from sort of DSM and the real medical side, and actually thinking, okay, there's benefits to this, that it's just natural differentiators within the brain. Everyone's wired differently anyway, but these are just groups of people that are wired differently in similar ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So really finding the benefits of that. And I think we're still pushing against a little bit of, there's a bit of friction in terms of awareness and understanding, and therefore creating an openness to talk about it, therefore creating an inclusive environment, or an equitable environment, as we like to sort of design for. And I think there's a quote, I can't remember exactly who it's by, but it says, once you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And that just highlights again that you've got such different sides of the scale of what people need under that neurodiversity umbrella. So to think specifically, I have to design for this one trait, you'll be there forever, and it wouldn't be a very holistic design, because it would just be so haphazard. So it's really latching onto that sense of choice that we're offering, generally in the workplace now anyway, and that understanding that people can use and are empowered to use those different spaces. A lot of what we're seeing at the moment is people wanting to come back to collaborate and socialize, and they're the buzz terms that we're hearing. But actually, if you take an autistic person, they might not want to do that, or they might not feel so comfortable doing it. So we've got to think, okay, how can we support them so you're not bringing everybody back to the workplace and they're going to have to start masking again, covering up their, maybe symptoms isn't the right word, their behavioral traits associated with their neurodivergence. And that, the pandemic was a leveler in a sense. These people got to, everybody got to control, as we mentioned, control their environment and make it work exactly for them. And now if we're mandating people coming back to the office, you've got to make it work for them. It's not fair otherwise. And like I say, they'll have to come back and mask, and that's just emotionally draining. So creating some of these sort of spaces of sanctuary, to take 5, and bringing in natural biophilic elements to those spaces. So it's going to make you so much calmer being in a small room that's got some natural imagery, maybe views of outside if that's available to you, neutral colours, and also bringing in, maybe, as we spoke about previously, sort of soundscaping and an opportunity to connect all of the senses to nature, smells perhaps, although that can be quite, you'd like to offer a sense of control over the smells in a space like this. And I think one of the areas that maybe we don't touch on enough is the texture as well, the texture you find in the environment. And for a lot of neurodivergent people, they might want to stim, so play with something or touch something to ground them back to a base level where they can work again. And by having some natural kind of textures around that they can just stroke, or a dog, as we mentioned, something to just ground you, will be really impactful. And so realize that these colleagues are just as worthy as everybody else.
That's lovely. I interviewed David Acoyman of Nook Pods, and he's got these sort of sensory pods where people can go, and they're movable and they're amazing. And he's really interested in it. I actually got that from there, designed for the extremes, and you've designed for everybody. So I've got to credit him for that. But right. in their Nook Pods, he told me he has underneath the table, he has like a fiddle stick. So for people to go in there and it just just what you say, it brings them down. I mean, I was like, my goodness, this things that you think about. I mean, we're all like that. So I mean, especially, at the moment, I'm going through a bit of a turmoil thing sort of with things. And I'm fiddling. And I'm like, well, we're all like that sometimes. And we sort of all need to, it doesn't. I was talking to a friend a couple of weeks ago, and we were just saying about, we talk about neurodiversity, but actually we're all, our neuro side of things is diverse for us anyway at different times. So I think and nature is such a thing. I mean, soundscaping is great, and being able to sort of control your lighting. I know in the Nook Pods you can control the color that you have, so some people like purple, some people like blue, so you've got that variation, that control to like bring you down very quickly. It's all right, it's good if you can create something that's a mean and everybody sits in there and goes, oh, okay, I'll get to a certain level. But if you want to bring someone quickly, for them to be able to go in and go, oh, this is how I want it, that, like you say, I like that phrase you use, the micro control. I think that's really, really a valid point there. I mean, how are you finding just generally in sort of on the commercial side? I mean, you mentioned about business development sort of things that you're doing as well. How are you finding work, sort of businesses? Are they sort of embracing this? Are they looking mostly at their bottom line? What's the sort of trends at the moment? Is it a real mix, or are the ones that are embracing it, are they really embracing it? And is that kind of like, are you feeling optimistic, or what's the sort of like snapshot, as it were?
I think I'm feeling optimistic. There's definitely progression towards that consideration of the human experience within a workplace, and not just seeing people as commodities and functional beings, essentially. But there's still work to be done. Like I say, it's positive progression, but there's still work to be done. I think if you think back to prior to pandemic, we were speaking with predominantly CEOs, CFOs, COOs, like people that are generally very functional and have that, okay, how are we going to fit people in? How much is it going to cost me? What's going to be the return on investment from a very tangible perspective? But now 9 times out of 10, probably more, we're seeing people being involved in these projects right from the beginning, whether that's as a sponsor or actually just a key driver of the project, and ultimate influencer. And that's really been a huge tangible shift that we've seen. And it just shows that there's much more consideration about that human-centric side of the workplace. Is it creating sort of human or people solutions to a spatial challenge, if that makes sense? So you can put a great light in, and it could light up a workstation, but if there's no one there, there's no purpose of having the light or the workstation. So what's it got to do? How's it meant to make people feel? It's really interesting, actually, this drive, and consideration of it as an investment and not just a cost. So you're investing in your people. Eventually you will likely see sort of an improvement of productivity, but it doesn't go in silo. There's got to be the right behaviors in the space. There's got to be like I say, giving people that freedom to explore and use the space in the way they feel like they will support them the best. You can't just give people a great space and say, okay, but still I expect to see you at your desk 3 days a week. Does that make sense? So yeah, there's definite progression. And we're working on, like I say, there's so much data to show that sort of even biophilic elements within the workplace can have such a great impact on essentially bottom line performance. But really it's linking that space can impact people's well-being and their happiness and their healthiness, both mentally and physically and socially. You're connecting people, you're going to be more creative, you're going to have some great innovative conversations in a space that's been created to incite that type of behavior. And that therefore will increase your bottom line. But with such a huge upfront spend, sometimes that can be a bit like, yeah, but how many desks are we putting in?
Yeah, exactly. I do mention it a lot, but the that Terrapin Bright Green did that fantastic report. I think they're going to update it, but on the economics of the economic benefits of biophilic design. And if people are listening to this podcast, I do encourage people to go to the Terrapin Bright Green website and download. They've got like a load of resources on there that's free to download, and it's just really, really good. There's some facts and figures that people can reel out to the businesses to kind of like to add to the force of putting in biophilic design. So you think really that businesses generally are doing enough to support sort of mix of personalities and different tasks? Are you finding that like generally it's kind of okay?
It's getting there. Tasks, I think, before personalities.
Yes.
So like we say, designing since I started with Claremont, who do design and build for offices, we've been talking about the agile workplace and activity-based working, and that really is about creating different spaces to suit different tasks. So yeah. I think we're making some really good progress there. When it comes to personalities, I'd question it maybe a little bit more. So this is again further diversity essentially within the workplace, and we use the big five personality model, or the 5-factor model. So that's looking at, call it ocean. So it's openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So each of those are on a scale. So you've got an opposite to those. And it's rather than putting people into types like Myers-Briggs, for example, I think that using the scales just gives you that element of uniqueness to each individual. And it's probably the better in terms of academia to use as a model. And if we take introversion and extroversion as an example, because most people are very familiar with that, typically the workplaces have been created for the extrovert. So open plan isn't a very nice place for an introvert to be necessarily. You don't have that sanctuary or that sense of security, especially if you're sort of towards the middle of the open plan space. So Susan Cain writes quite a lot about this, the experience of an introvert in a book Quiet particularly, and it's about bringing these people who probably make up around 50% of the population, to be honest, back to the forefront as well. So you're creating spaces that work for both the introvert and the extrovert. So and like I mentioned before, there's a lot of talk about collaboration and socializing, and those being the key reasons that people should come back to the office. But as an introvert, you probably couldn't think of much worse. But ultimately, it might be what's best for your job role, and the outputs that you're creating. So let's say that you bite the bullet and come in for those activities. After a couple of hours, you're likely to be completely emotionally drained, mentally drained, because that's really essentially what an introvert is. You get your energy from solace and being quiet and in your own space, whereas extroverts get their energy from socializing, being around people. So you're draining energy, you then need somewhere to go to replenish that. And for most people, when you're taking a break, you think, oh, let's go to the social space.
Yeah,
like that again. It's not going to help. So I'm always conscious when working with our designers that we include little spaces that might be within the social area, but are just one person spaces or two person spaces where you can still feel connected, and as if you could join in if you wanted to, so you're not excluded in any sense, but actually you can just sit on your own. No one's going to question it. No one's going to say like, oh, you never get involved. It's just a nice place of sanctuary for you, and you can then recover your energy and then get back to whatever it is you need to do in the afternoon.
Yeah,
it's really considering all of these different personality types and creating spaces that will help them function in the best way possible, in the most productive way possible.
Yeah,
I was
going to say creating sanctuaries, I think, are really, really important. Yeah, really are. Yeah, somewhere you can just go and recharge and just sort of think. And if you can create it where it's still in the same space, it's still in like that sort of where everybody's hanging out, if that's the only space you've got, but you've got somewhere where you look like you're on your own, or you kind of like, you can just sort of like tuck yourself in and sort of, again, prospect and refuge, isn't it? You're looking out and things, Is there anything else you'd like to add before I come to my final question?
I think we spoke a bit about this sort of prospect refuge kind of area, and that was I think coined by Jay Appleton and his habitat theory. And it's essentially, there's so many spaces in nature that you can feel that sense of seeking information, gaining information from what's around you, so the sense of prospect, being vigilant as well, and then also having that sense of shelter and protection. So you feel you might have, if you're in a cave, as you mentioned earlier, you've got protection around you because no one's getting in behind your back, but you can still see out and check for any, as what would have been evolutionarily, sort of any hazards or anything like that. And I think one part of our evolutionary psychology really is that we still have that fight or flight kind of reaction to potential hazards. Historically, that might have been something that happens on like a threat to your life, and that still happens now, but it could also, we still react to stimuli such as getting shouted at by your boss or something like that. We still have that same reaction. So having these places of refuge that you can sit, but you still can be vigilant of what's around you and understanding those threats, you're tapping back into what's helped you survive in the past through evolution, whilst being able to then recover all that energy, as we say, start to feel safer again, and then get back to your work. We're not talking about putting a cave into the office. We're sort of, well, you might want to. It'd be quite cool if you did. But it could just be sort of high back chairs that you sit on. That it could be a little nook that you use it. You got an area of your weirdly shaped office that you're thinking, oh, actually, I could use that. Put a little safe space in there. Or it could be a little area that you use, biophilia again, as kind of a visual block, so people can't see in easily to you, but you can kind of still see through it, to just define a little space of refuge. And I think it's so important, coming back to the workplace, that we tap into those principles found within nature and not necessarily replicate completely, but create similar environments that still satisfy that need and that yearning we have internally.
That's lovely. Well, let's hope that all the other designers that are listening to this, and businesses and even architects, actually, have got the ability to be able to landscape a space in a workplace, that they take on board what you've just said there. So well, I'm coming to the final question. Just to listeners, a reminder, if you would like to buy a copy of the Journal of Biophilic Design, please go to our website or go to Amazon, and you can download a copy, or you can buy a printed copy, which obviously looks very beautiful. And obviously, if you'd like to support the podcast, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on all your RSS feeds. That would be lovely. And if you're feeling flush, do buy me a coffee. See, I've said it again. Okay, so my business coach will be like happy about that now. So that's that done. Right. So final question to you, Becky. If you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like?
I think back to that common theme, to be honest, that we've spoken about in that wider understanding of biophilia, sense of connection. So grounding ourselves probably back with nature, with each other, with time, being present. I think we miss that. when we sort of are slaves to our phone or to our laptops, whatever it might be. So yeah, that love of life really, and grounding ourselves. For me, back when I mentioned sort of I went traveling a little while ago, and on one of those trips I was living with a tribe in Fiji for a little while, and these people, they live off the land and the water, they work alongside it essentially, and they're so happy, and they've got a sense of connection with their people, because those around them, you're all working together for a greater good, a sense of purpose. And for me, that just it highlighted that we need to be present, we need to rely on those around us and support those around us, and like I say, just be present in the moment, I think is really important. So grounding, yeah, using biophilia to ground us, I'd say.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.